Okay, we're talking about Algebra 1, Lesson 25. And we're talking about solutions of equations. We learned in the previous two um, lessons that if you add something to both sides of the equation to then we don't change the equation. And if you multiply both sides, every term on both sides, if you multiply or divide by a number that's a non-zero, you're not going to change the equation. Okay, so we looked at something like 3x minus 2 equals 10. All right, sometimes you're required to do both operations. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add its opposite. Remember, the opposite is simply changing its sign. So it's 3x equals 12. Then we want to get rid of that 3. How do we get rid of that 3? Well, we simply are going to divide both sides by 3 or multiply by its reciprocal. Well, it's easier just to divide by 3 because it's a whole number. But when we're dealing with fractions, that's when we want to start using multiplying by its reciprocal. So we get x is 4. So let's look at this other equation right here. And this is where some of the mistakes come in. So when you start adding negatives, you tend to forget your rules for multiplying and dividing negatives. So we have negative 5m plus 6 equals 8. Well, first thing we do is we want to get rid of the constant. We add its opposite. It's a positive 6, so I'm going to minus 6. Okay? So I get negative 5m equals 2. Now I want to get rid of this negative 5. Okay? It might be easier to multiply both sides by a negative 1 first. And you can do it in multiple steps. That becomes what? A positive 5m. And this becomes a negative 2. Now, when I get rid of my 5, I simply divide both sides by 5 and get m equals negative 2/5. Now, could have I skipped this one step here and combined it? I sure could have. I could have done this. I could have said, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 5. But you can't just drop that negative. You have to divide both sides. So this becomes simply a negative divided by negative is a positive. Yes? And then you've got a positive divided by negative, so the answer is negative. And this is where some of the confusion and some of the errors come in. So it might be easier to say before you do this, let's multiply both sides by negative 1. That becomes a positive 5m. And then this becomes a negative 2. And then it's simply just dividing by that number. And you get negative 2 over 5. Okay? So let's look at another one with fractions. So let's look at 24. Let's do 25.3 first. So basically it says negative 7k minus 4 equals the negative 21. Well, we want to add its opposite. Right? So you can't drop that. You cannot drop that. And that's where a lot of also errors come in. You have different signs, so you can find the difference. Negative 21 is bigger, so it's going to be negative. Now I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by a negative 1. I only have one term on each side. If I had two terms, I'd multiply each term. This simply becomes 7k equals 17. And then I divide both sides by 7. I get k equals 17 over 7. And you can leave it like that. Let's look at the next example. It's 25.4. It says negative 11p plus 5 equals 17. We're going to do this in one step. So we're going to subtract, add its opposite. Do to one side, do the other side. So you have a negative 11p equals 12. Because the signs are different, you find the difference, and 17 is bigger, it's positive. Now I'm just going to simply divide both sides by negative 11. Well, negative divided by negative becomes a positive. So I simply get p equals negative 12 over 11. Because I have a positive 12 divided by negative 11. And that's my answer. So let's look at one with fractions. Because again, when we start adding fractions, decimals, and negative numbers, that tends to freak students out and go, I don't know how to do this. But didn't you learn in elementary how to add, subtract fractions, how to multiply and divide fractions? Well, same thing here. You just use those rules. So here, what's the opposite of negative 1/2? Just because it's a fraction, we're not turning it over. That's reciprocal. We want the opposite. It's just a positive 1/2. So this becomes 1/5 m equals. Then you have to go to your rules. How do you get a common denominator? I don't, so I have to rename these. Yes? So now I can add. That becomes 5/4. I'm going to leave it as an improper fraction for now. Then I want to multiply both sides by what? Its reciprocal. I could divide by 1/5, but then you have to remember to do this, and then you have to remember to keep, change, oops, flip, and you tend to mess up that order or not do it correctly. So the best way to do is when you have fractions, leave them in improper or proper form, and then multiply by its reciprocal to get rid of it. So what you do to one side, you do to the other side. So it simply becomes m equals 25 over 4. Okay? So let's look at one with decimals. Example 25.6. And your code for this lesson is, I want you to write pumpkin, the word pumpkin, on the top of your page on homework lesson number 23. Okay, the word pumpkin, write it down so it's clear, top of lesson 23. So now let's look at one with decimals. 0.4x minus 0.2 equals negative 0.16. Again, we just have decimals here. We're solving for x, so we want to get rid of our constant. What's the opposite of negative 0.2? It's positive 0.2. So you add that to both sides. That becomes 0.4x equals, the signs are opposite, so you're going to find a difference. So you're simply subtracting decimals. So that I'm doing it in my head, and because this one's bigger, it's negative. Are you kidding me? What? Was it recording?